What's up guys, welcome back indeed to the channel. So today I wanted to work on a video talking about fixing the uniques, specifically highlighting the rogue. So what I wanted to do with this video is provide a solution to the current state of uniques. I'm sure a lot of you guys have maybe gotten certain drops. You're like, wow dude, I'm super excited to get this item, but you realize that it isn't good when you start like posting it on forums or you share it with maybe your clan. And I understand because it's super rare to get some of these, but some of these legitimately have no place in the game in the current state. So my goal with this video is to basically fix them as well as get some of your guys' feedback, as I do want to work on a longer form video to fix all of the uniques, and hopefully I can send this to Blizzard as a Diablo partner and they can kind of listen in, because right now there are so many uniques specifically on the rogue that have zero play in the game, and even at the highest level there's no way to make these work. The idea of a unique is some sort of niche play style or some sort of different mechanic on a variation of a skill, where a lot of the uniques just in general are terrible right now in Diablo 4. You will see no good players use majority of the uniques just in the game in general, but rogue in particularly has basically some of the worst stuff. So let's go ahead and start off the example of why some of these uniques are so bad. So we're going to use Ashara's Khanjar. This is a dagger. So the reason why it's so bad is because starting right off, swords are going to be superior in terms of the end game, and you only get these uniques in world tier 3 and 4, so you're basically at the end game. So the daggers just in general lose out on to having close damage, versus a good character would actually have the crit strike damage roll on their piece of gear. And then obviously once you rank it up 5 out of 5, this number would then increase further, just like it would on like the dagger. But for the most part, close damage is going to be losing out to crit damage. But on top of that, you have a roll, and by the way, you cannot change the uniques. The uniques that drop whatever rolls, that's what you're stuck with. So that is another thing that makes these even worse. But getting plus bonus damage to basic skill is not really what anyone realistically wants. On top of that, you're losing out on a legendary power. But on the second line, we have damage to crowd control enemies. That's something that has a condition being met, versus just say getting damage to vulnerable enemies or something like crit damage. Those are going to be up more so because on bosses, you cannot do a lot of crowd control effects on the boss until the stagger bar is completely built up. So it loses out in that department as well. And then movement speed is interestingly not a very good stat on a weapon. You know, you can get this maybe on your boots and it's not that bad, but to get it on a weapon, yeah, you're losing out on so much more. And then you have lucky hit chance, which is a little bit more niche because you can't just get this, which does offer a little bit more of like flavor on the weapon. But then the special power that we're really excited about, where we have attacks with this weapon can increase your attack speed from 4 to 6% for 4 seconds up to 30%. Well, let's look at a weapon that would actually be good for any melee variant of a rogue. So on a good rogue, you would actually usually want to have some sort of main stat or even all stats. You can get vulnerable, crit strike damage, core skill damage. So you're losing out on, in comparison to this, right? What do we get? We have basic skill damage, which that's completely useless. What about the bonuses? Well, we have 16.5 damage to crowd control enemies, and this number can go up higher once you get to 5 out of 5. But for the most part, that's the only real damage that you're getting. And then the legendary power isn't even that good when you compare it to something like this one over here, which is the accelerating aspect. So you can just have a crit give you for 5 seconds, as opposed to, again, looking at this is less time, so it's 4 seconds. This one goes up to 30%, but this one goes up to 25. So the difference is 5%. But remember, this has to be built up. You have to get multiple hits in to actually get that. Whereas most builds towards the end game, you can crit literally about 50% of the time for most builds. Some builds, yes, I understand you go higher, some builds can be lower. But for the most part, you're looking at the end game at about 50% crit rate, which just lets you shoot up to 25 instantly, and you have all of the good stats, vulnerable damage, core skill damage, crit strike damage. You're getting all of those stats, which just makes it so much better than this. So that's kind of like the starting point of the video to kind of explain why these uniques are just so bad. We actually just recently covered a video going over why are the uniques so bad, and kind of goes over this. But basically, if you want to keep this, you basically have to make this give you way more attack speed. Even giving us something like maybe even 50% attack speed would still be maybe still not as good, because remember, all of the stats on the item you cannot roll. I can go get a sword and then start rolling all of the good stats that I want on it, whereas when this drops, this is basically what's there. So this loses out on a lot of different reasons, but to make this exciting, maybe something like 75% movement speed would be excellent, and that would kind of keep the core identity of this to build up the attack speed, and then you'd have massive attack speed, and maybe attacks would reset or not reset like the counter, as in like if I built it up each each tick would kind of continue it, so it wouldn't really drop off for like a longer duration. That'd be kind of cool too, so you can have like, you know, many seconds, because in Diablo sometimes you kill a pack, then you have to walk to another pack. I'm sure you guys have seen it. I mean, heck, in the Hell Tides, we kill a pack, and then for 4 seconds there could be no enemies, and I'm gonna have to reset that. So maybe having that stack, like it would stack up to maybe 200 seconds or something, then we're looking at something again much better at the end of the day. But yeah, that's what it would need to have to keep its core identity, because my goal with these series is to go over every single class and then talk about how we can improve it, and on top of that, it doesn't change the identity of the item, right? So yeah, just like maybe like 75, even 100%, because remember, even though this is like pretty insane, I'm asking for like 100% or even 75% increased attack speed, we need this in order for this to still kind of have the same stats and actually be viable in the game. We're talking about some of the rarest items in the game being absolutely terrible, which the rarer the item, you want it to be at least somewhat viable. And like I said, even if we gave it 50% attack speed, it still maybe would lose out in terms of viableness, because you can only go up to 100% attack speed in the game, and this would be awesome. 50 to 75 would be a good start, but 100%, yeah, then it's actually like unique, and it's like, oh my gosh, I got this item to drop. You want your players to feel excited when something drops at the end of the day, right? Next up, this is Condemnation. This one does see a little bit of play. So it has increased damage with dual wielded weapons. You got core skill, so you have like at least 2 stats. The damage to injured can be kind of used, but then you have basic and then you have close. So the first 2 stats are completely terrible on this item. And so how it works is you get to have increased damage when you spend 3 combo points, and the basic skills with the weapon have a 30% chance to generate 3 combo points. I think in order for this to actually be really good, you just need to have your basic skills just generate straight up 3. No percent chance, because how this would work is you have your little like shields for the combo points, and how it works is sometimes people don't pay attention to that as much as maybe they should, and sometimes you're attacking multiple times with your basic skill, and maybe 2 times when it's already built up. And just to make it even faster and make it so it's more of a combo, it would be much better if, like, let's say you every 2 attacks would give you 100%, or every attack might be a little bit too powerful because it's a 40x multiplier, but still, remember, on the first line of the stats, that's going to be inferior. You're losing out on, you know, crit strike damage, and then on top of that, basic skill damage is no damage. You're still losing out on, what is it, if we're looking at like good stats over here, we're losing out 35 vulnerable or 31 crit or 30 core at the end of the day. And remember, the basic skill is, it doesn't matter, you can give you 500% basic skill attack damage, and it's still going to be losing out to most of the core skills in the game, unless you're doing some crazy build. Like the only viable like basic skill at the moment that people actually play is Arclash, which is on a sorceress, but for the most part, that's like a worthless stat. You're missing out on 2 like solid stats. One of them, you kind of get half. I'll give, like, you know, close damage half stats, but you're still missing out on the basic skill. Like, that's kind of useless. But yeah, I think maybe after using 2 combo points, you either go to full, or every single attack gives you full. So it's like you use your generator and then your spender, generator, spender, and you have this kind of combo here. And I think that would still keep its core identity while still maintaining how powerful that it can potentially be. All right, next up, Cowl of the Nameless. And by the way, I would love for all you guys' feedback on this, because I do plan to, again, make this some sort of like a spreadsheet or something, or just make it condensed so it's not like a, you know, an hour long when we dump all of it into like one sort of like thing. But anyways, Cowl of the Nameless. So what does this helm do? And the stats on the helm aren't actually that bad. It's got Dex, cooldown reduction, crowd control, the duration, maximum energy. But what does it lack? It's lacking life and armor. Those are 2 stats that you would ideally like to have on your helmet. Or if you're doing any imbue build, yeah, you want to have your poison imbue, your shadow imbue to get some extra damage out of it. It gives us increased lucky hit chance against a condition, which is crowd control enemy. So after crowd control them, then I get a 25% chance increased amount of, you know, lucky hit. And how lucky hit works in the game, it's not just like instantly, like let's say with ice shards it has 25%. I know it's a completely different class, but we could go to rogue here. Let's do this. Let's go to rogue. So with twisting blades, we only have a lucky hit chance. Well, it says 33 over here. I think it's actually different in the actual game. But if we go to penetrating shot, let's say for example, because I know this one is actually 50%, that does not mean over here that if we were to get the Cowl of Nameless, that does not make that have a 75% chance on the penetrating shot to have a lucky hit. How that works is actually 25% of a different number, which is going to be off of the percent of the 50%, if that makes any sense. So yes, it's not just, if it was just flat 25%, that would actually be pretty solid, because 100% lucky hit chance, or let's say double lucky hit chance, or just a very, very high number. 25% of whatever your other number is still very, very low at the end of the day. It's just simply not enough. And because it also has the condition, I would say remove the condition completely against crowd control enemies. You want these uniques to feel unique, right? You want them to feel like they have power. Speaking of power, this is probably one of the biggest jokes in the game for uniques. I do not see hate anyone using these are worse to equip than any, like, just any pair of, like, regular pants that you'll find. Why? Well, first off, dodge change is actually pretty good. Shadow damage, pretty useless. The damage to elites and damage to enemies affected by trap skills is both still really bad on pants. You can get a lot more damage in other areas. What you want on pants is specifically getting life and some sort of forms of like armor, damage reduction to close or distance, or just flat damage reduction. That's what you'd want on pants. To get these, it's super, super bad compared to, like, let's say like a good pair of pants over here where you have a massive amount of life. These can go to 5 out of 5, so you can see the like same number. So you're missing out on like 1,000 life. You get so much more damage reduction. You're also missing out on dex, and then you're also losing out on another form of damage reduction. This one over here, I have 25% less damage taken from crowd controlled enemies. You're missing out on that as well. Like, you lose out on way too much. And the funny thing is this special power on these pants, it makes it so when you, unless it hits a boss or a player, Death Trap will continue to rearm itself until it kills an enemy. So what that means, because a lot of people think it's backwards, okay? They think, oh, it just keeps on activating every single time. That's OP. No, it's not how it works, because that's how, I would want it to work. But as soon as it kills even just a small enemy, okay, you have a longer cooldown on it. It is absolutely terrible. So there's really no point. It just increases your cooldown if it actually kills an enemy. So I guess the idea would be just to throw it down.
You can thank me later.
Because remember, as soon as it hits a boss, so like you'd think, okay, well, since it would lose out on its power until it kills something, it would kill a small monster and just lose out on the power of just rearming. So it's terrible for that reason. And on top of that, it increases the cooldown, not lowers the cooldown. If it just straight up gave you 20% cooldown reduction, it would still be bad because of all the stats on the item not being defensive enough for the pants category. So it's just terrible in that aspect. How would I actually fix it? I would suggest that it just continuously rearms itself basically infinitely on specifically bosses. I think that would be really cool if it just continuously rearmed itself against bosses. Would be still continuing kind of what it does, because the idea is to continuously rearm itself, and then that way when it kills a small enemy, maybe it's not as good. Or you can take it a completely different route and make it so if you wanted to make a completely like trap oriented build, it'd be really cool to see that your trap skills have no cooldowns but instead cost some sort of resource. That would be cool as well. Or just make it so you have the ability to keep on placing traps, and your entire skill bar would be mostly set up for traps. And maybe you can make it so your core skills are disabled for damage. It says like only your traps deal damage, so you can actually make a trapper build. So it keeps the identity of kind of having like this really cool trap build, because no one's really just playing solid traps. You still got to play a core skill. It's the way the game is designed, and this would offer some unique gameplay experience. But those are like my kind of two options for this. Now, Grasp of Shadow. This was something I thought was super, super cool. When you use a shadow clone, it's a really cool mechanic with the ultimate. So what it gives you and what you're losing out on isn't actually that bad with its stats. You get attack speed, you get vulnerable damage, you get shadow clone damage, which is not as good as crit, because you're losing out on 12% crit, which is pretty actually massive over here. And then on top of that, with this, you have a lucky hit, so that only works off of lucky hit, okay? So damaging a vulnerable enemy with a marksman or a cutthroat skill has a 30% chance to summon a shadow clone that mimics your attack. So kind of make more sense of this. Remember how I was talking about like penetrating shot had 50% chance? So that 50% chance would be the lucky hit. Then you take that lucky hit chance, and then you go, well, you have to hit that 50%, and then you go to 30%. So realistically, that's about 15% chance. Does that make sense? Hopefully this makes sense in terms of lucky hit. So now I have a 15% chance for a shadow clone to actually mimic my attack. The problem with this is that shadow clone does not have all of your legendary aspects and powers to start spinning around the blades with like twisting blades. This is not just like straight up 15% more damage with that power. And remember, you're losing out on a legendary aspect as well. So how this should work is just straight up, it should just give you at 100% of the time. Every time you attack, it has a shadow clone. Remember, the shadow clone doesn't get any of your aspects, so it loses out on a lot of damage anyways, and it's just kind of cool to have the shadow clone to maybe activate some sort of debuff on the enemy. I think this should straight up just always have the shadow clone. It would make the build feel unique, and on top of that, remember, losing 12 crit as well with it. But the ranks to all core skills is still pretty decent. At the end of the day, you would get +3 to the skills versus +4, so it's not that bad if you were to go to 5 out of 5 on it. But again, it's just the legendary aspect that you're losing out on, which could be like 20-30%-ish damage, is huge. You're still losing out on damage overall, and that's using penetrating shot, which has one of the highest, in terms of the rogue, it has one of the highest chances for lucky hit chance in terms of a core skill. Next up, Skyhunter. What does this do? It makes it so, well, first off, in terms of the stats and marksman skill damage, obviously if you're using a bow, that's what you'd want. It gives you some crit strike damage. This one's not that bad for like the 4 stats in the beginning. It's just that the bows in this game are just terrible, because vulnerable damage is way better than distance enemies. But anyways, how it works is the first direct damage you deal to an enemy enemy is guaranteed to crit strike. If you had the maximum stacks of precision key passive, which is for the bow, you can gain some energy. This can only happen once per cast. So it has the potential to have, like, you know, you being able to one-shot. This one I thought was kind of cool, but then I'm like, well, I'm losing out the vulnerable, and I'm losing out on my two-handed special power where, like, let's say if I was to play, like, penetrating shot, what would I be losing out on if I went to the aspect over here? Penetrating shot over here, when it hits, you know, enemies, I can have it split, and then it does like 50% of the damage, but those don't split. I'm losing out on my two-handed, like, special, like, thing to get massive amount of extra damage, which basically renders this a lot less viable. And if you're playing it towards the end game, usually energy might not be too much of a problem. With Rogue, you can get pretty high crit already, and since the precision key passive, which is, if we go to the Rogue over here, over on the tree, in terms of the precision, we're gonna get extra crit anyways, so we're gonna get a maximum of increased critical strike damage for it. So that can kind of help out. And if you're using your basic skills to kind of generate these, eventually you're going to get a decent amount of multi, but again, you're still losing out on the power. And I think that's the biggest thing that people don't want to give up. If they did make it so uniques could have a legendary aspect tied to it, this could help out. But at the end of the day, it's just not nearly as good as it should be. So how would I fix this? I would say what would actually make this pretty insane, and it would make it an actual unique, is if it just dropped the requirement of both of the things. So if it made it so you always crit, that would be insanely powerful. I think that people would make builds around it, because a lot of your stats that would normally require you to run crit chance, like, you would have so much more damage because your rings would not need to roll crit, your gloves would not need to roll crit, and in terms of like your build, you wouldn't need to look for crit. So I think that'd be really cool if Skyhunter was 100% crit, and maybe it would only give you energy when you attack an elite or something, because if it just gave you infinite energy, I think both of those could be separated into two different things. So either make it so you always 100% crit, or you always gain energy, and then you have a really cool unique. If you add both of them, hey, that makes it even cooler, and I think that people would be super ecstatic to get this as a drop. It'd be one of the most exciting drops in the game. Windforce is the OG Diablo item, so it needs to do what it should actually do. So it has lucky hits with this weapon, have a chance to deal double damage and knockback. So how I would work this in is that it has a really high knockback chance. So again, if we look at penetrating shot, 50% chance, at a perfect roll 20%, that's a 10% chance to knock back and deal double damage. 10%, you know, more multiplier is still inferior to having the legendary power, and on top of that, getting the you know, bonus, you know, losing out on the core skill damage and vulnerable, the same things that applies to everything. It's just not nearly as good. So this would be something where I think it needs to stay true to its original item, and that is that it has a 100% knockback chance. If you look at like the previous games, this would be really awesome because you can't really knock back the bosses anyway, so it'd be really good against, I guess, killing trash, but trash is not really a problem with most builds towards the end of the game, which again, this is where the uniques drop, right? So I think if you were to make this better, and if you've played my Twisting Blades Rogue with the daze and knockdown, you can consistently, with the exception of you can't do it to a world boss, you can't do it to like a nightmare dungeon boss, but you can consistently knock down the elites again and again and again. If you guys have seen my gameplay, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So knocking down targets doesn't really matter too much. Even if it's 100% knock, well, this does a knock back. It's not even a knock down, it just knocks them back. However, on the passive over here on a Rogue, which would be something that would be something that we could talk about, it's actually up, I think it's a concussive over here. After knocking it back or knocking down the enemies, you get increased critical strike chance against them, which that would kind of work well with it, right? But when you critically strike a dazed enemy, because you'd still have to apply daze in some sort of fashion with this to actually get that. So I think it should just be 100% chance to knock back the target, and then that way you have like just increased critical strike chance. As far as doing double damage, obviously that would kind of like be best in slot for like every single build, but I think that that would make Windforce have its iconic, like, you know, because this was a powerhouse in D2 for a long time before we got like different rune words. So I think in order for Windforce to have the same feel, 100% chance to knock back, obviously it wouldn't work on like, you know, the bosses, but 100% chance to knock back would be really, really fun to have. And in terms of doing the double damage, that could be the 20% chance for, you know, the double damage, or it doesn't have to be lucky hit. It should just be 20% like just increased damage, because again, remember, you're losing out on an aspect, and that is pretty massive at the end of the day. So that's how I would make Windforce. Now, as far as the word of Hakan, this is what I would do with this item. So what does it do? Well, you're losing out on a lot if you look at like a good amulet in the game. Most good amulets will want cooldown reduction, you want movement speed, energy cost reduction, and then if you get any damage reduction or even controlled impaired duration reduction, can be kind of nice to have. But the three key stats that everyone's looking for is cooldown, movement, energy cost reduction for most builds, right? You lose out on all of that. What do you get in return? Well, you get crit strike with imbued, you get ultimate scale damage, non-physical damage. These are all pretty bad for Rogue, and then you get +2 to rank of all the imbuements. This could go to +3, and all these numbers could be increased. But the special power that's supposed to make all of this worth it is your rain of arrows is always is imbued with all imbuements, but you can't really spam Rain of Arrows because that is, of course, your ultimate. So if you look at Rain of Arrows, what's the cooldown? The base cooldown is 55 seconds. So I'm basically banking on 55 seconds of an ultimate that most builds, because you invest into on the Paragon board in the end game and on terms of your items, you're getting bonus damage with core skills. So all of that is worthless because you're wanting to get ultimate damage. So if you make your whole character based off of ultimate damage only, and remember, this is going to be non-physical damage, which is terrible to scale with because the rogue simply just doesn't do bonus damage to cold. It's cold, poison, and cold, poison, and shadow damage, right? That's so hard to scale all of those numbers separately. It is a nightmare to make this thing actually viable. So the whole idea is to make these Rain of Arrows super powerful, and it gives you plus ranks to imbuements. How I would solve this to try to keep its core identity is maybe have either Rain of Arrows be super fast, so as in like Rain of Arrows has, let's say, a reset when you kill an elite, or maybe it has 50% cooldown reduction, just massive, right? And that way you can cast on every single pack of elites. You see a pack of elites, you slam your Rain of Arrows, and then it just deletes it, right? That would be kind of cool. It might be very strong, but remember, at the end of the day, you're sacrificing so much, and I can melt an elite pack in a couple hits of Twisting Blades anyways. It really wouldn't be that insane overall when you're looking at characters that can min-max. Remember, it's supposed to be very rare. Not only is it a unique, but it's also an amulet. Amulets are the hardest thing to drop in the entire game. So yeah, this thing is just kind of a joke right now in the community. How you could also improve it is looking at the ranks of all imbuement. If it gave you plus like 10 ranks, that would be insane, and that would be very powerful for specifically bosses, even PvP, but it would actually make it super good. I mean, we're looking at a unique. What does this do that's super unique? Rain of Arrows, yeah, giving the imbuements is cool, but is that gonna delete the all the small mobs? More likely, unless you're getting ultimate skill damage on all your pieces of gear and getting, I don't know, shadow damage, getting poison damage on all these different rolls. Yeah, it's not realistic. So make Rain of Arrows more spammable. Like, if it was on maybe like a 20-ish second cooldown, it's still kind of long, especially because like I go pretty fast in the game. I can get 2 different elite packs, and if I'm just using Twisting Blades, it's like I just melt everything anyways. But yeah, that would be something that needs to be changed, where you can either spam Rain of Arrows or like plus 10 ranks of all imbuements. If we got like 10 ranks of all imbuements, that would sound insane, and it would be pretty good for melting bosses with, let's say, poison imbuement would get probably out of control for certain bosses, but at the end of the day, you would still have cooldowns on your imbuements. So what would actually make this even more unique if it just said imbuements have no cooldowns? That would be another big brain, and then you'd have like this thing that's really cool for imbuements. But anyways, those are just some of my ideas. I would love to know your guys' thoughts. What do you guys think of this? Should I actually send this to Blizzard in terms of giving them feedback? Because I think the uniques should be good. These should be super powerful because they are super rare. What's the point of having an item that's super rare if it's like completely worthless? And I mean, I'm not saying every single one of these needs to be the most OP, best in slot for every character, even though some of these I've been mentioning super strong stats. They need to be super strong. Like giving this even like 50% attack speed would probably still be bad. Even if we like doubled the legendary or the unique power, some of these would still be awful. Even if doubling the unique power on this would make it even worse because it would be longer cooldown. So what I'm trying to say is they need these to actually be unique versus just like it has a unique effect, but it's just like terrible, right? Why would you want to increase your cooldown on your ultimate, even though it's supposed to like only kill small monsters, but it can't kill bosses, which is the point of using your ultimate, not to kill small monsters. Some of these are just kind of backwards, and so many of these, and we'll get into more characters, but like I just don't get why they have these items that are unique, but they deal less damage. Why would you want to deal less? I understand it pierces, but less is not what you want to see in unique, especially since the different rolls on the thing are just terrible, and you can't even reroll them. Anyways, rant long enough. That's my thoughts on uniques or the rogue. Let me know yours down below. If you guys enjoyed the video though, drop a like on it, subscribe if you're new and you want to see maybe more of these when I do them in the future, but hopefully we'll get a patch and a lot of these will actually get buffed. I'll see you in the next video.